super heavyweight or a 308 or a 275 powerlifter doesn't have to have a really high aerobic base. But what typically happens is over a period of time, let's say it's a scale of 1 to 10 and all they need is 2. They fall to a 1.5, they become purple. They can't breathe, their lower back's tight all the time. And then all they need to do to get that aerobic base back to where it needs to be to recover from what they do is
get the fuck up. Simon says, get the fuck up. Throw your hands in the sky.
All right, the first question we're going to start with is, why do strength coaches have their football players running gassers and 100-yard sprints?
I should start off by saying I don't train football, so take this answer for what it's worth. You probably should ask the coaches doing that why. I don't know. That's not, if I were the football coach, I would not do that. You can always make the argument for the mental toughness side of thing, or maybe once in a while in a game you're going to have to get into kind of the lactic acid zone or glycolytic. So to put that in every once in a while I think is not a terrible thing, but I think most of your time should be spent under 12 seconds of bursting or maximal sprinting, and then the rest of your time in the oxidative zone. Because the oxidative zone, in my experience, is what lets you get to that burst again with full power.
Can you define the oxidative zone a little bit more for the listener?
So kind of low intensity stuff, less than, like you could do like tempo work, less than 75% of your max heart rate with adequate recovery. That's something we used to do a lot of. You could even do like low intensity conditioning circuits. So I could do 10 med ball throws overhead with a light jog to some jump rope, hit some jump rope for 30 seconds, kind of more like fartlek training, and then monitor it with heart rate monitors and make sure you're staying 130 or so heart rate zone.
All right, so you're monitoring it with the heart rate. Do you also monitor it with, I've heard some coaches will tell the athletes as soon as you start to feel muscles burning, move to the next movement.
Yeah.
Is that another indicator?
Yeah, absolutely,
that,
absolutely,
okay.
yeah.
Because it's for recovery,
Yes.
is the purpose of it. It's not, I think with all conditioning, strength and conditioning from that standpoint, when people look at conditioning, so to say, there's two avenues to look at conditioning. Right. There's conditioning that you're going to do, which is track work, field work, to be able to get faster or to develop better technique. Right. Then there's conditioning for recovery, which when, in my opinion, when you're in the strength and conditioning realm, the most important one is the conditioning for recovery.
Right.
And a lot of times I'll see people use high intensity interval training, and I don't personally think that's the best to use on off days if you're trying to recover
right.
from a weight training session.
Right.
Because now your body has to recover from that session.
Right, right.
Where, I've always used light sled drag. I mean, I'm Westside Disciple, so light sled drags, just concentric type movements without a lot of eccentric and kind of pumping the blood in there. And the other thing I want to pick your brain on with that is, and this can be from your own training perspective, the lifters that you work with and then your athletes as well, is I had a conversation with Mel Siff many years ago about recovery training sessions, active and passive. So if it's massage or whatever the modality is, your body will become accustomed to that. It will supercompensate, recover the same way any other training will be. So if you're doing sled drags all the time for recovery, after 3 or 4 weeks, it's going to stop working and it needs to change.
Yeah.
Or if it's an off season, it needs to be pulled out completely.
Right.
And what I see some people do is they just ramp the volume up. Like it doesn't work, so they drive it up and then they become
then you're smoked.
Overtrained from that because they're not cycling out. So is that something that you do and something you do with the athletes?
Yes, just you touched on all the stuff, even to the recovery, to the max effort work, to the stuff in between. You have to cycle it all because your body will adapt to it. Whether it's a stress or a stimulus or whatever we're talking about, eventually you're going to get used to it. And not even only on the physiological side, the mental side. If I have to go do this recovery modality, just kind of like, just like your max effort movement. You have to do the same one every week. You're kind of, you start to dread it. So we try to switch out everything from warm-ups to the max effort to accessory work to conditioning and even recovery. When we may foam roll for 3 weeks, and then when the kids come in, get on the carb buffer for a couple weeks, get away from that. And like even their extra workouts. I had a kid trains really hard, and he'd been doing the same stuff for like 5 weeks, and had to pull him aside and say, "I'm glad you're doing stuff, but let's try these, 5 different exercises." It was very light shoulder work, nothing that's super hard, but he's not getting anything from it because he's on it too long.
Yes, true. So that would be the biggest takeaway I see from this thing is, to cycle the recovery work, or it's going to work against you, and you'll end up, or if you keep driving it up, you're just going to end up being an aerobic athlete.
Yeah, it's funny. SIF in super training had a table that broke down all the sports, the primary energy systems, and you'd be surprised how many are actually ATP and oxidative. There aren't many sports that are truly, lactic acid in the glycolytic. Wrestling, right?
Debatable.
Right. So even the ones that are debatable.
Yeah.
If we would spend less time on this, we call it the zone of shit, me and my assistant.
Yeah,
in the middle, you know what I mean? And get to the explosive stuff and then develop your oxidative system, I think we would probably be a lot better off.
Yes. And the other thing with the recovery and the oxidative system is you're dealing with an aerobic threshold, which I've talked about in videos in the past, and that's where your recovery base comes from.
Right.
So, a super heavyweight or a 308 or a 275 powerlifter doesn't have to have a really high aerobic base, but what typically happens is over a period of time, let's say it's a scale of 1 to 10 and all they need is 2, they fall to a 1.5, they become purple, they can't breathe, their lower back's tight all the time, and then all they need to do to get that aerobic base back to where it needs to be to recover from what they do is walk on a treadmill twice a week for 10 minutes, and that will take care of that. So there's a minimal recovery threshold, I suppose, or base with every sport. Some sports, wrestling and so forth, it's going to be a little bit higher. 400 meter or marathon running, I mean, it definitely shifts to a certain degree, but it's always there. Right. It's younger people, well, I may take this back because they're not as conditioned as they used to be, but athletes coming out of sports that are going into powerlifting have a strong aerobic base that they spent 6 years developing.
Right.
I think it takes a few years for it to really click down, unless they're really fucking lazy. If they're doing something, if they're training, they're going to maintain some of it.
Yeah.
But as soon as it clicks down, I always said that's my theory why people in the NFL don't last long, because they have to train in college, and when they go to the pros, they're not training as hard, and it takes a few years for them to lose that one step because they're still working, they're still practicing.
Right.
So after 3 years, if they lose that aerobic base just a little bit, that's one step, they're gone, they're out.
Absolutely.
It's a theory. There's no science, there's no studies, I have nothing behind it. It's just bullshit is what it is. But it sounds good. It sounds really good.